Hello? My name's Saren, and I came home after 3 years thinking I'd surprise my father. But he wasn't behind the door waiting for me. He was curled up on the porch, shivering, locked out of the very house he built. Inside, my family was laughing, passing rolls, pouring wine, pretending nothing was wrong. They told everyone I abandoned him. But what if they were the ones who did? What if they erased me from our home, siphoned his money, rewrote the story? And what if I let it happen for too long? Would you want to know what I found when I opened that door? The bus ride into Ashburn was quiet. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. Just the low hum of the engine, the occasional cough from the older man 2 rows back, and the same Virginia pine trees I remembered as a kid flickering past the foggy window. I hadn't been back in 3 years. That town had once been the safest place I knew. It wasn't anymore. I stepped off the Greyhound with one duffel bag and a folder of documents I hadn't yet decided what to do with. My boots touched the cracked sidewalk on Maple Lane like I was stepping into a memory I wasn't sure I wanted to revisit. Leaves crunched underfoot, and the air smelled of chimney smoke and damp soil. Ashburn was unchanged, and yet completely different. As I walked down the block toward our old house, the red-roofed Cape Cod I grew up in, something twisted in my stomach. It was late. The sun had dipped below the trees. The kind of chilly dusk that made you walk a little faster just to get somewhere warm. When the house finally came into view, I slowed. The porch light was on. For a second, I smiled. Maybe this would go better than I thought. Maybe he left the light on for me. But then I saw the shape curled up near the steps. At first, I thought it was a bag. Or maybe a neighbor's dog. But it wasn't. It was my father. He was huddled beneath a thin, tan blanket, his head tilted against the siding like he'd been waiting, then just gave up. His coat was zipped only halfway, and I could see the white stubble on his chin, his hands trembling slightly against the cold. Clutched in one of them was a photo. I didn't even need to get closer to know what it was. It was me. That photo was taken the summer before I left. The last good summer. I was in a blue dress, holding a lemonade, smiling at something off camera. It was the kind of photo you didn't frame for display, just slipped into a book or drawer to keep close. But he had it in his hand, out here, in the cold. "Dad?" I whispered. He blinked, slow. His eyes had trouble focusing, but when they landed on me, something softened. Not joy exactly, not yet, but recognition. And that alone nearly dropped me to my knees. "Saren," he said. His voice was rough, barely there. "You came home." "I did," I said, kneeling next to him. "Why are you out here?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked toward the door behind him, the same door I used to run through after school, the one that smelled like cinnamon and floor wax. Now it was shut tight, the porch light above it buzzing faintly. I stood and knocked. No one answered. From inside, I heard music, laughter. There was a gathering going on. A family dinner, by the sound of it. I knocked again. Louder this time. Still nothing. "Who's home?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated. "Isolde, her husband. A few others, I think." And yet no one thought to check the porch, to check on him. I pulled out my phone, stared at the screen, then put it back in my coat pocket. Calling would be pointless. I didn't want a confrontation. Not tonight. "Come on," I said gently, helping him to his feet. "Let's get you somewhere warm." He nodded but said nothing. I wrapped his arm around my shoulder, guiding him down the steps slowly. His knees buckled a little, and I had to pause twice before we reached the sidewalk. The diner down the road was still open, Ashburn's only 24-hour spot. We made it there in about 15 minutes, though it felt like 50. The waitress, a woman about my age with a warm smile and a tired expression, didn't ask questions. She just showed us to a booth and brought hot coffee without us asking. Walter drank his in silence, cupping the mug like it was made of gold. "I wasn't expecting," he began, but the words got stuck somewhere in his throat. "I know," I said softly. "I didn't call ahead. I just needed to come home." The word home landed like a stone. He nodded again, but this time slower. I could see the fatigue in his eyes. Not just physical exhaustion, but something deeper. The kind of weariness that doesn't come from walking too far. It comes from being ignored too long. "You look healthy," he said after a while. "Stronger. I've had to be." He looked down at the photo again. The corners were torn, the middle slightly wrinkled. "She told me you didn't want to be part of the family anymore," he said, almost as if talking to the table. "That you moved on, that you asked not to be contacted." I didn't respond right away. What could I say? The lie had already been planted and watered for years. "She lied," I finally said. "But I guess you figured that out by now." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was thick with things left unsaid, but not for long. "I didn't walk away, Dad," I whispered. "I was pushed, but I'm not running anymore." He met my eyes then, and for the first time in years, I saw him, really saw him. The man who used to walk me to school when I was too scared to go alone. The one who built me a dollhouse when we couldn't afford real gifts. He was still in there. Buried, but not gone. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew this much. That house still belonged to my father. And the people inside? They'd forgotten that. But I hadn't. My father didn't say much as he dipped his spoon into the clam chowder, his hands still trembling slightly, though less now than when I found him. The steam from the bowl curled toward his face, warming the space between us in that little booth by the window. Outside, Ashburn had gone dark. A few street lamps buzzed faintly, and cars rolled by every so often, headlights flashing across the window like slow-motion lightning. I hadn't eaten much, just pushed pieces of cornbread around my plate with the dull side of a butter knife. My mind was too loud for hunger, too full of images I wasn't ready to deal with yet. He finally broke the silence. "Did you notice? The pictures? They're gone." I looked up. "Pictures?" He nodded slowly. "Yours? There's nothing of you in the house anymore." For a few seconds, I just stared at him. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I already knew. Somewhere inside, I'd felt it before he even said it, like the house had been purged of me while I was gone, erased like an old chalkboard no one bothered to rewrite on. "They took down your painting from the hallway," he continued, voice thin. "That one you did in high school, the one with the lake and the orange trees, used to say it made the place feel alive." I remembered that painting. I painted it when I was 16 and scared of being average. That piece hung in our hallway for over a decade, and now it was just gone. "What happened to it?" I asked. He stirred his soup. "She said it didn't match the new color scheme." Of course she did. I didn't have to ask who she was. Isolde always knew how to reframe something ugly into a matter of aesthetics. When she couldn't argue with emotion, she made it about style. Control cloaked in taste. "She also moved your high school metal box to the attic," he added. "Said the shelf was needed for more relevant memories." Relevant. That word stuck to the roof of my mouth like bad peanut butter. "What about the Christmas ornament I made in 3rd grade?" I asked, half joking. He smiled faintly. "Last I saw it, it was in a bag marked miscellaneous." I leaned back against the booth cushion. The waitress passed by, refilling my water with a polite nod. She must have felt the tension too. How quiet we were for two people supposedly reunited. My voice dropped. "Did she tell you I didn't want to be contacted?" He paused. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he knew it too well. "She told me you were overwhelmed," he said carefully, "that you needed space, that you moved on." I closed my eyes briefly, not to cry, but to keep the rage inside from boiling over. "I called Dad," I said, more firmly than I intended. "I sent letters, emails. After I left, I tried, for months. No one replied. My number was blocked. My letters came back with return to sender in handwriting I'd recognize anywhere." He looked at me then, and something shifted in his eyes. Not doubt, just grief, regret. "You thought I abandoned you," I said flatly. He didn't argue. "You thought I didn't care enough to come back, to call, to write." His fingers tightened around the spoon. I didn't want to believe that. But over time, it started making sense. The way she said it. Of course it did, I muttered. She said it enough times you started hearing it in your own voice. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence confirmed everything. Thanksgiving 2 years ago flashed through my mind. I'd spent it in a motel room outside Raleigh, eating gas station turkey slices and wondering if they even remembered I existed. I didn't get a single message, not even a group text. I thought maybe Dad lost his phone. Turns out he'd been told I wanted to be left alone, that I didn't care, that I was done. But I wasn't. I'd just been erased. It was a quiet kind of violence, really, not the kind that left bruises, the kind that made people vanish without ever walking away. He took a slow sip of water, then set the glass down with care. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know." I nodded. I could have said a lot right then. I could have told him he should have questioned things more, that he knew me better than that. But what would that solve? So instead, I just said, "I'm here now." And that seemed to be enough, for the moment. After dinner, we walked slowly back toward the edge of town. I'd booked a small Airbnb above a local bookshop, nothing fancy, but it had heat and a clean bed. I didn't tell Isolde I was back, not yet. I had no intention of knocking on that front door, not while she was still the one deciding who got to walk through it. Outside the bookshop, before we parted ways, Dad touched my arm. "She told me you were the one who said goodbye," he said. I met his eyes. No, I was the one who was left behind. He didn't answer. Again, he didn't have to. I watched him walk back down the sidewalk, his pace slow but steady. The old Walter was still in there, tired, worn, but still walking on his own. Back in the room, I dropped my bag and stood by the window for a while, watching the lights flicker across Main Street. A teenage couple walked by laughing, their voices bouncing down the block. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I opened my folder and stared at the documents I'd been carrying for weeks. Legal notes, letters, printouts. I hadn't known what I was going to do with them, until now. Isolde had taken me out of the frame, but she didn't get to keep the whole picture. She could play the perfect daughter all she wanted. She could host her church brunches and talk about caretaking like it was some holy burden she'd chosen to bear. But I knew what she was really doing. And soon, so would everyone else. I didn't leave them. But now I was ready to walk back in. And this time, I wouldn't knock. I didn't sleep much that night. After walking my father back to the small apartment Isolde had arranged for him after downsizing, I returned to the room I'd rented above the bookshop and laid awake, staring at the wooden ceiling. Every breath I took felt heavy, as if the truth I'd barely started uncovering had weight of its own. By the time the first light of day crept through the window blinds, I had already showered, dressed, and poured myself a cup of stale coffee from the old percolator on the counter. I didn't bother trying to look well-rested. No one in that house would care. The sun was slow to rise over Ashburn, filtered through the thin mist that clung to the sidewalks like a secret no one wanted to talk about. I took the long way to the house, walking through side streets I used to know by heart. The playground near Maple Avenue was empty, the swings still. The church marquee read, "Family is where the heart is." It felt like a joke now. When I reached our street, the air sharpened. The Bramhall home stood exactly as I remembered it, yet it felt like walking into a stage set built to impersonate a life I no longer belonged to. The red shutters, the porch steps, even the hedges trimmed a little too perfectly. It all looked like home on the outside. But what was inside had changed. I didn't knock. I had no plans to knock. I turned the knob and walked in like I still had a right to. The house smelled different, cleaner, colder, like lemon disinfectant and vanilla candles, trying too hard to pretend everything was fine. The living room had been redecorated with lighter tones, beige pillows, cream throws. The wall where our family photo gallery used to be was now taken over by a massive wooden plaque that read, "Family is who shows up." I stopped in front of it, stared, took a slow breath. It wasn't just a new decoration, it was a declaration. My pictures were gone. No graduation photo. No softball team photo from 8th grade. Not even the blurry one of me on my 10th birthday blowing out candles. Gone. Like I never existed. In their place, I saw Isolde and her husband Dorian at fundraisers, posed beside community leaders and city officials. A photo of her receiving a plaque that read, Ashburn's Caregiver of the Year. I stood there in silence, my heartbeat slow, steady, but hot in my chest. That's when I heard the quiet creak of a door. I turned toward the kitchen hallway, half expecting Isolde to appear. But it was empty. Whoever had been watching me had disappeared behind a closed door. I walked toward the front entrance to leave. I needed air, space, something that didn't smell like lemon spray and lies. As I reached for the handle, I heard a voice call softly from the other side of the fence. Seren? I turned and saw Mildred Koenig, our neighbor from across the street. She looked the same as ever, sensible coat, short gray curls, the same sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mildred, I said, forcing a smile. She stepped closer to the gate, hesitating before she spoke. I didn't know you were back. Neither did anyone else, I said quietly. I didn't exactly send a postcard. She studied me for a moment, her face softening. I was going to the mailbox and, well, I have something. I think it belongs to you. I met her halfway across the lawn. Her gloved hands fumbled in her coat pocket before pulling out a small, slightly crumpled envelope. My name was written in my father's handwriting, familiar and uneven. The ink faded. He gave it to me 3 years ago, she said gently. Asked me to mail it. I forgot. And when things got complicated, I didn't know if it would help or hurt. I stared at the envelope. 3 years. It had been here the entire time. Why now? I asked, not accusing, just tired. Because you deserve to read it, she said. And because I should have done the right thing sooner. I thanked her and tucked the letter into my coat. She left with a nod, quiet and purposeful, disappearing behind her own door. I stood on the porch for a few more moments before sitting on the steps and opening the envelope. The paper inside was thin, lined. My father's pen strokes were shaky, but legible. Seren, if you're reading this, I probably didn't get the timing right. But I want you to know, I didn't stop loving you. I still see you in every sunrise. Don't believe the silence. It was never yours. I read it twice. 3 times. I had never cried for being forgotten. But now, I cried for being remembered. Folding the letter back carefully, I tucked it into my bag. I had barely stood up when I heard Mildred again. She'd come back out, walking across the lawn with more purpose this time. There's something else, she said, quieter now. About your calls. I met her eyes, feeling my throat tighten again. She glanced around, even though no one was near. Isolde told us you didn't want to be contacted, that you'd asked to be left alone, that you'd moved on with your life. She told you that? She told everyone. I took a breath, steadying the sting that rose inside me. She had your father's phone, Mildred continued, after you left. She said it confused him, that it was better if she handled things. I nodded slowly, anger simmering now. Not the kind that exploded, but the kind that grew roots. It wasn't just that she lied. It was how easily people believed her. You always called on his birthday, Mildred added. Every year, right around the same time, he'd wait, every year, then stop asking, said he didn't want to bother you. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to keep steady. She rewrote everything, I murmured, and no one asked questions. She made it sound believable, Mildred said softly. She's good at that. She always was. A long pause followed. Then Mildred looked toward the house behind me and said something I wasn't expecting. I think she's scared of you being back. I gave a small, humorless smile. She should be. As Mildred returned home, I stood there in the yard, looking at the house I used to run into after school, covered in mud and excitement. Now, it was the scene of something far colder, and when I turned toward the front window, I saw her. Isolde, standing just behind the curtains, watching. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, she didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had been expecting this moment and wasn't concerned. Not yet. The curtains dropped the second our eyes met, as if they hadn't been pulled back intentionally in the first place. I didn't move, not right away. The porch was damp, the air heavier than before, and a quiet tension settled in my chest like dust in an untouched room. I waited a moment longer, listening for movement inside. Nothing. Just the soft ticking of wind chimes someone had hung near the entryway. New ones, not the rusted set Dad and I used to fix every spring. The door was unlocked this time. She wasn't home. I knew that already. Mildred had mentioned earlier in the morning, in that careful way of hers, that Isolde had a brunch scheduled at the church. Fundraising, she'd said. Something about a new wing for the retirement ministry. I figured it would give me an hour, maybe two. Long enough to find out what I needed to know, long enough to see what they'd tried so hard to keep buried. I stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind me. The house smelled like artificial lavender and wood polish. Everything was in its place, too perfect. It wasn't how I remembered it. It wasn't how he would have kept it. Not Walter Bramhall, not the man who left books stacked on the floor, receipts stuck to the fridge with old magnets, and his glasses in the laundry room for no good reason. I walked slowly, running my hand along the hallway walls, past the vacant spot where my painting used to hang. The silence inside was thicker than outside, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I turned left into the study. It still had the same worn oak desk and shelves packed with paperbacks, but the clutter was gone. Clean surfaces, labeled folders, matching binders. None of it looked like Dad. It looked like a hotel disguised as a memory. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk, the one we used to toss unpaid bills and random keys into, and found only manila envelopes now, each neatly marked. The third one down caught my eye. Utilities property. Utilities, my foot. I opened it and pulled out a packet held together by a binder clip. The first page was a copy of the deed to the house. I scanned it, my fingers tightening as I reached the signature line. Dad's name was there, Walter Bramhall. But the handwriting was off. It was jagged, uncertain, like someone had guided his hand, or worse, signed it for him in a rush. His usual signature had rhythm, even in his older years. This? It looked forced, unnatural. I flipped through the pages, noting the date, 1.5 years ago. Right around the time I stopped receiving forwarded mail. Right around the time Mildred said he stopped talking much. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of every page. The deeper I went, the more I found. Documents that shouldn't have been there, things I wasn't supposed to see, printouts from a bank I didn't recognize. One statement listed the account holder as Walter Bramhall, but the mailing address, Isolde and Dorian's condo in Richmond, monthly deposits from elder care grants and assistance funds, and regular ATM withdrawals, thousands. I didn't even realize my jaw had clenched until I felt it in my temples. My father had never needed financial assistance like that, not back then. He had retirement savings, a pension from teaching, and the house had been paid off since I was in college. And now somehow, a separate account existed, money moving through it like it belonged to someone else entirely. I stood still for a moment, listening. Still no one home. I walked into the kitchen, where the mail sat in a wicker tray by the fridge. Sorting through it, I found nothing of interest. Grocery ads, charity mailers, a flyer for a lawn care company. But the name on each envelope read, Current Resident, or Isolde Crane. Not one addressed to Walter. I was about to head back to the study when the front door creaked open. My stomach tensed. I hadn't heard a car pull up. No footsteps on the porch. Then his voice, calm, casual, but cold enough to freeze the air around me. Looking for something? I turned slowly. Dorian Blake stood in the doorway, keys in hand, eyebrows raised like he'd just walked in on someone stealing his Sunday paper. He looked the same as always, pressed shirt, neatly trimmed beard, wedding ring that caught the light a little too well. He had the face of a man people trusted too easily, charming enough for church, sharp enough for boardrooms, and empty enough to lie without blinking. "Didn't expect you," I said evenly. "Clearly," he replied, eyes scanning the documents on the counter. "Isolde's not home." "I know." He stepped farther into the room, closing the door behind him. "So what brings you back to this particular corner of the world?" I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up the deed and held it up toward him. Did he even know he signed this? His expression didn't change. Not one muscle in his face twitched. That's a legal document, he said, walking slowly toward the kitchen island. Signed and notarized. Everything's above board. His name's on it, sure, I said. But that's not his handwriting, at least not the one he used for most of his life. I know the difference. Well, maybe you're just remembering it wrong. I met his gaze, unmoved. I remember it better than you think. He smiled then, the kind that made you want to lock up your valuables. Careful, Seren. You're starting to sound like someone looking for a problem. And you're starting to sound like someone who's hiding one. A pause stretched between us. Finally, he leaned in slightly and said, You should tread lightly. You've only just come back. Stirring up trouble so soon? Doesn't reflect well on your track record. Is that a threat? No, he said smoothly. Just an observation. People talk. People remember. I stepped around the island and gathered the pages into my bag. I'm not here to make a scene, I said calmly. But if something was done to my father without his understanding or consent, I'll find out. You and I both know he's not in the state he used to be. Dorian's jaw flexed, but his tone didn't change. Walter agreed to everything. He needed help. We stepped in. That's what families do. No, I said, turning toward the door. What families do is protect each other, not profit off them. As I pulled the door open, he added, You might want to be careful who you accuse. Wouldn't want another misunderstanding like last time. My spine stiffened, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Instead, I stepped outside into the thick afternoon air, letting the door close behind me. The storm clouds above were moving in slowly, but steadily. The storm didn't start outside. It started right there, in that room. After I left the house that afternoon, the clouds followed me. Not the kind that carried thunder, at least, not yet, but the kind that made you pull your coat tighter and keep your thoughts closer. I didn't go back to the room above the bookshop, not right away. I needed to clear my head first. I drove the half-mile stretch out to the small park by the water tower, the one Dad used to take me to when I was little. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching a pair of teens throwing a football near the tree line. I envied their freedom, how they could move without thought, yell without fear of judgment. I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without a storm in my chest. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, the sky had darkened for real, and the temperature had dropped noticeably. I stepped inside and immediately noticed the silence, the kind that feels planned. The fire was going in the living room, a showpiece of warmth, but the air around it was cold. Fabricated. Like everything else in that house lately. Dad sat on the recliner, shoulders slumped, eyes flicking from the muted television to the window and back again. He looked smaller somehow, dimmed. Did you eat? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I think so. I crossed the room and stepped into the kitchen. The dinner plates were still in the dishwasher, unwashed. The countertop was spotless, too spotless. I opened the fridge. No signs of leftovers, not even a bowl of soup or a sandwich wrapped in foil. There were 2 boxes of frozen meals on the bottom shelf, both untouched. I moved to the pantry and found a small pill organizer resting on top of a cereal box. I opened it. Wednesday and Thursday were still full. It was Saturday night. I took a long breath and walked back into the living room, holding the organizer in my hand. Dad, I said gently, have you been taking these? He looked at the container and blinked. That's Isolde's job. She hasn't given them to you in at least 2 days. He frowned but said nothing. He hasn't eaten since yesterday, has he? I asked. Isolde's voice cut in from the hallway before he could speak. He forgets, she said. I can't force him. I turned to face her. She stood with one arm resting against the doorframe, holding a glass of wine like we were chatting about the weather. She looked calm, polished, like someone who believed in her performance. Then maybe he shouldn't be left to remember on his own, I said, keeping my tone steady. He gets confused, she replied, sipping. If I press him, he gets upset, so I let him decide. You let him decide whether to take heart medication? She rolled her eyes. You've been back 2 minutes and already acting like you know everything. I held up the pill organizer. I know this is unacceptable. She gave a clipped smile. You always were dramatic, Seren. Everything's a crisis with you. I didn't respond. I walked over and placed the organizer on the coffee table, right in front of Dad. I'll remind you every morning from now on, I told him. Don't rely on anyone else. Isolde scoffed. You don't live here. Maybe I should. She didn't like that. The next morning, I kept quiet. Observed, watched the routine. Isolde spent an hour preparing for her church appearance, curling her hair, adjusting the brooch on her coat, spritzing perfume into the air like a fog of false benevolence. Dorian left early for a business breakfast. That left Dad and me. I made him eggs and toast. Not fancy, but warm. Real. He ate quietly, carefully. I handed him his morning meds, one by one. He hesitated, but took them. At noon, I checked Isolde's Facebook page. The top post was a photo, her feeding Dad in the living room, the same room he'd been sitting in just 20 minutes earlier. Alone. Caption: Taking care of Dad is a blessing. Not always easy, but worth every moment. 57 likes, 20 comments, all from women in her prayer circle. You're an angel, Isolde. He's lucky to have you. True caregiver spirit. You inspire me. I turned off my phone and stared out the window. Dad sat on the porch now, a blanket over his lap, staring at nothing. No one else noticed. By evening, I had enough. She was in the kitchen arranging snacks on a ceramic tray like she was hosting a magazine shoot. I walked in, leaned on the counter, and said plainly, "If this keeps up, I'll get the law involved." She didn't flinch, didn't pause. Legal action? From you? Her smile was practiced, slow. Please, Seren, don't be ridiculous. I'm serious. She took a grape from the tray, popped it in her mouth. You've been gone 3 years. You think people are just going to take your word over mine? Dorian entered then, setting his keys on the table, eyeing us both. What's this? He asked casually. She's threatening us, Isolde said with a light laugh. Apparently she doesn't like the way I've been handling Dad's care. Dorian chuckled. Seren, come on. You've barely been back. It's not a good look to come home swinging. I kept my tone even. If you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't be worried. He walked toward the fridge, opened it, pulled out a soda. You're stirring up trouble where there isn't any. Again. I'm protecting my father. From who? His own daughter? Dorian snapped back. You always think everyone's out to get you. No, I said softly. Just the ones who are. We stood there in silence, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Isolde finally spoke, her voice lowered. You're not going to win this, Seren. You've got no one in this town. No one's going to believe you. I didn't answer. I walked past her, past Dorian, back into the living room. Dad looked up from his recliner with that same tired confusion. I smiled at him. Want to go for a drive tomorrow morning? Just you and me. He nodded. Okay. Isolde called after me. You don't get to rewrite history just because you regret leaving. I stopped in the hallway. No. But I do get to stop you from rewriting his. That night, I didn't sleep much. Again. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting breaths, counting reasons. The next morning before breakfast, I made a call. Her name was Marla Eames, an attorney, independent, clean track record, experienced in elder care disputes and financial abuse cases. She answered on the third ring. Marla Eames speaking. I didn't hesitate. Hi, I'm Serene Althea. I need help protecting my father. The next morning started with drizzle, thin, cold, and insistent. It clung to the windshield of my car as I pulled into the narrow parking lot behind Marla Eames's office. A low, gray sky stretched across Ashburn like an unfinished thought, and I could feel the pressure in my temples from the sleepless night I'd spent staring at the ceiling, making lists in my head. When I stepped into the law office, the scent of cedar and something faintly citrus hit me. Clean, intentional. The space was small but focused, with thick legal books lining the walls and a single framed quote near the receptionist's desk. Facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. That hit a little too close. Marla stepped out within a minute of my arrival. She was mid-40s, hair pulled into a low knot, no makeup, but sharp eyes that had the weight of someone who'd seen plenty and wasn't easily impressed. "You must be Seren," she said, extending a hand. "Come on back." I followed her into a private room with a glass-topped table and 2 chairs. No distractions, no fluff. I liked that. As I sat, she clicked her pen, poised and ready. "Tell me everything." I did. For the next 20 minutes, I walked her through every beat of the past few days, finding my father on the porch, the erased family photos, the fake signature on the deed, the pill organizer collecting dust, the staged caregiving photos, the blocked communication, the bank statements, the whispers from Mildred, and the sick feeling growing in my gut. She didn't interrupt, didn't flinch, just scribbled notes and nodded when necessary. When I was done, she leaned back slightly and tapped the end of her pen against the table. "You may not be the heir on paper right now," she said carefully, "but legally, you have a window, if we move fast." I opened my bag and slid over the copies I had made, the notarized deed, the bank statement, a photo of the pillbox still full on a Saturday. She looked through them silently, flipping page after page. "This isn't just moral failure," she finally said. "This could be elder abuse, and criminal." Her words didn't shake me, they grounded me. Like finally hearing someone say out loud what I'd been screaming internally. "What happens next?" I asked. "We need documentation, more of it, witnesses, a medical evaluation if possible, and a declaration from your father." "That's going to be hard," I admitted. "He's lucid, but he's hesitant. He still loves her, in his own way." Marla nodded. "That's common. People mistake loyalty for protection. But love doesn't mean silence." I left her office an hour later with a checklist, a tentative plan, and the rarest of things in this mess: clarity. Driving back to the house, the rain had slowed, but the clouds hadn't lifted. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Dorian's car was gone. Probably at his office or working one of his weekend consulting gigs he liked to boast about on social media. Isolde's sedan was still parked under the carport. She must have returned from church. I stepped inside without announcement. The house was too quiet again. I walked through the kitchen, nothing out of place. Into the hallway, no sound. But the moment I turned the corner into the laundry room, something stopped me cold. There, on the floor, near the edge of the utility sink, was the scarf I had knitted for Dad the winter before I left. It was navy blue, wool blend, with a pattern that took me 3 tries to get right. He used to wear it even on days it wasn't that cold, just because it was from me. I'd seen it last week, neatly folded in the hall closet. But now, it was soaked. Mud-caked. Dumped in a pile beside a cleaning rag and what looked like a used mop head. My throat tightened. I bent down slowly, picked it up, and held it in my hands. The weight of it felt heavier now, not because of the water, but because of what it meant. I didn't need anyone to explain what had happened. It was obvious. They'd used it. Used something I made for my father to clean the floor, or worse, the bathroom. And then tossed it aside like garbage. No one said anything about it. No one apologized. Not that I expected them to. I wrung it out in the sink, then washed it carefully with dish soap, rinsing until the water ran clear. I laid it across the back of a kitchen chair to dry and didn't speak a word the rest of the day. That night, the house was dark early. Dorian came in late, Isolde was in her room, and Dad had gone to bed around 7. Before I turned in, I walked into his room, quiet, careful, and placed the folded scarf on his pillow. He didn't stir. Then I went to the office. I opened my laptop and printed a single-page letter, formal, calm, signed by Marla and myself. A notice of legal intent, not a threat, a promise. I walked to Isolde's room. Her door was slightly ajar, light still on. I pushed the paper under her door. The sound it made was almost nothing, but I knew she'd hear it. They ignored my warning, and now I wasn't just knocking. I was walking through the front door with the law behind me. By the time Sunday rolled in, I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way most people expect anger to look. I wasn't pacing or shouting. I wasn't tossing accusations around like darts. No, I was still focused, ready. They thought I'd flinch. But when I stepped onto the porch that morning, dressed in the same navy blazer I used to wear to client meetings back in Raleigh, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight into the house like I belonged there, because I did. The smell of roasted ham and cinnamon rolls hit me first. Isolde always did know how to curate an experience. She had music playing, some soft instrumental hymn, and fresh flowers arranged on the sideboard. Everything was polished, just like her. People were already gathered in the living room, holding styrofoam cups of coffee and small plates with carefully arranged fruit. I recognized a few of them, ladies from the church, a couple of retired school teachers, even someone from the mayor's office. Walter was there too, tucked into the far corner of the room like a piece of furniture no one really wanted but couldn't throw away. He looked out of place, wearing a cardigan that was 2 sizes too big and socks that didn't match. Isolde floated between guests like she was hosting a segment on public access television. Every smile was a campaign, every gesture rehearsed. She saw me the moment I stepped through the door, and for just a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face, but it was gone before it could settle. "Seren," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "I didn't know you'd be joining us." I smiled politely. "Guess I forgot to RSVP." A few heads turned. A few mouths paused mid-chew. I watched as Dorian made his way toward me, mimosa in hand, confidence radiating off him like heat off blacktop. "Well, this is a surprise," he said. "You look prepared." "I tend to come that way," I replied, my eyes scanning the room. Isolde linked her arm through his, all performance. "We're just so glad you're here. We were worried you'd be too busy with your new life to remember little Ashburn." I gave her nothing in return. Just silence, the kind that makes people uneasy. Walter's eyes met mine briefly from across the room. He looked unsure, maybe even nervous. I nodded at him gently. I needed him to know that this wasn't about him, not directly. This was about truth, justice, finally cracking the surface. The room buzzed with small talk and clinking forks for another 10 minutes before it happened. Dorian, now 2 drinks in and a little looser in the shoulders, chuckled too loudly as he leaned over to a man near the fireplace. "She's only back 'cause she smells money," he said. "Isn't that what your sister said?" The laughter died instantly. My smile returned. I turned slowly toward the room and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, I'm back, but not for money, for truth." The room held its breath. I could feel the shift, the sudden collective realization that whatever this was, it wasn't going to be another cozy Sunday brunch. A few people set down their drinks. One woman crossed her arms. Another looked at Isolde with an eyebrow raised. Marla stepped through the door just then, quiet as a shadow. She wasn't dressed for brunch. Gray slacks, simple blouse, no makeup. She carried a laptop bag over her shoulder and a portable projector in her hand. "Sorry I'm late," she said to me. I nodded. "Right on time." Isolde's eyes narrowed. "What's going on?" I ignored her. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said to the room, "thank you for coming. Since we have an audience, I thought this would be the perfect moment to share a little something." Marla placed the projector on the edge of the console table. The room dimmed slightly as she powered it on. She connected the laptop, cued the video, and gave me a subtle nod. "This," I said, "is footage from my father's living room, recorded on the day he signed over the deed to this home." Dorian took a step forward. "Now hold on." "Don't worry," I said, "you're in it." The video began to play. The image was slightly grainy, but clear enough. Walter sat in his chair, looking unsure, his hands trembling. "Do I have to sign?" his voice asked, shaky, barely audible. Then another voice, Dorian's, cut in, unmistakable. "Just do it, or you won't see her again." Gasps. One woman covered her mouth. A man muttered, "Is that legal?" Isolde tried to speak. "That's been taken out of context." But the room was already turning. Dorian's bravado evaporated. He stammered, This is an invasion of privacy." "No," Marla replied calmly. "This is evidence. Admissible. And already submitted. Isolde's face had gone pale. Her carefully crafted facade was cracking, hairline fractures running fast. I took a breath, not to calm myself, but to land the final blow with precision. This home was built by my father. He paid for it, protected it, raised us in it. He opened his door to people who now lock him out of his own life, and he will not be stolen from, not by blood, not by marriage. Silence. The church deacon stepped forward. I think we should go. He walked out. Others followed. No one looked back. Isolde stood frozen, one hand still resting on the mimosa tray. Dorian's expression was blank, like he hadn't yet accepted what just happened. I turned toward them one last time. You buried me in silence. I just gave you an audience. After the last guest left the brunch in stunned silence and the front door closed behind them with a dull click, I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and let my hands shake for a full minute before setting it down. I wasn't shaking from nerves, not anymore. Those had burned off hours ago. It was the aftershock, the kind your body gives you when your mind's already bracing for the next blow. We didn't speak the rest of that day. Dorian stayed in the den, nursing whatever pride he still had, and Isolde disappeared into her room, the sound of her heels echoing like a threat against the hardwood floor. Dad went to bed early, asking for 2 Tylenol and nothing more. I gave them to him, kissed his forehead, and told him I'd see him in the morning, but we both knew something irreversible had shifted. Tuesday came fast. We arrived at the courthouse just after 8 a.m. The air outside was cold enough to sting your fingers. I helped Dad out of the car. He insisted on wearing his old navy blazer, the one with the fraying cuffs and a pen mark on the inside pocket. Said it was the only one that still felt like his. I didn't argue. Marla met us at the entrance with a nod and a black folder clutched under one arm. She looked exactly how I needed her to look. Steady, unbothered, all business. No pearls, no performance. Inside, the Ashburn County Courthouse was quieter than I expected. Not many people. A few reporters, some older folks from the neighborhood who probably heard about the brunch incident, and 1 or 2 of Isolde's church friends who looked like they regretted coming the second they sat down. Isolde and Dorian were already seated. She wore a cream-colored dress suit and that fake humility smile she reserved for judges and funerals. Dorian looked uncomfortable. He tugged at his tie twice before the judge even entered the room. The gavel didn't slam. The judge simply cleared her throat, adjusted her glasses, and said, "Let's begin." Marla stood. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that Walter Bramhall was misled into signing over legal rights to his property under coercion and without full understanding of the consequences. Furthermore, we believe financial misconduct was committed under the guise of elder care, and we have documentation, testimony, and audio-visual evidence to support that." The judge nodded slowly. "Continue." First came the documents, the signed deed with Walter's shaky handwriting, the bank statements showing monthly withdrawals that had nothing to do with medical expenses or home care, and the pill logs I'd kept for the past week, showing gaps and inconsistencies. Then came Dr. Merrow's statement, pre-recorded due to scheduling conflict. She explained that Walter had been experiencing mild cognitive decline, but was still capable of basic decision-making, if properly informed. She had never been consulted about legal decisions, not once. And then the video played, the same one we had shown at brunch, but this time with clearer audio and Marla's annotations. Walter's voice, confused and pleading, Dorian's, sharp and commanding. "Just do it, or you won't see her again." When it ended, the room didn't make a sound. The judge turned to Walter. "Mr. Bramhall, do you understand why we're here today?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." "Do you feel you were pressured into signing those documents?" He blinked. "I thought if I didn't, I'd lose what little family I had left." That did it. The judge looked down at her papers, then back at the courtroom. "This court does not take kindly to coercion disguised as caregiving. It appears that not only were Mr. Bramhall's rights violated, but that certain parties used their proximity to him for personal financial gain. Therefore, I hereby order the reversal of the property transfer. Walter Bramhall's rights to the home are reinstated, and he may appoint a co-caretaker of his choosing." She paused. Do you have someone in mind? Dad looked over at me. Seren, he said without hesitation. Always her. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. The judge continued. Furthermore, this court is referring Mr. Dorian Blake to the Office of Financial Crimes Investigation for misuse of elder care funds. Ms. Isolde Crane is hereby stripped of legal authority over her father's affairs, effective immediately. There was no gavel, no dramatic exit, just quiet paperwork being shuffled and the rising of bodies from chairs as people filed out one by one. Isolde didn't look at me. Not once. Dorian muttered something under his breath, but Marla raised an eyebrow, and he thought better of repeating it. We drove home in silence, Walter resting peacefully in the passenger seat. That evening, as the last light of day fell across the front yard, I heard the front door open and close softly. I was in the hallway when I saw her, Isolde, standing near the foyer, arms crossed, waiting. I just came to get my things, she said, her voice quieter than usual. I didn't argue. They're already packed. She hesitated. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I walked past her, opened a drawer, and pulled out a frame. It was the photo she had taken down, the one of Dad and me at the lake, the year before I left. We were smiling, his arm around me, my face pressed into his shoulder. I handed it to her. You don't live here anymore, I said evenly. Neither does your version of this family. She took it with trembling fingers, but didn't say anything else. She left 5 minutes later, her footsteps quieter than I expected. We didn't slam the door behind her. We just never opened it again. The days after Isolde left the house passed slowly, not because we were grieving her absence, but because we were finally learning how to live without the weight of her presence. I didn't expect peace to arrive like a parade. It didn't come with celebration or balloons. It came quietly, through the hum of the old heater kicking on in the mornings, the sound of Walter's slippers across the kitchen tile, and the smell of coffee that filled the hallway before either of us said a word. 3 weeks had gone by since the court hearing. Ashburn had started to dress itself for winter. The first snow came the day after Thanksgiving, just a soft dusting that melted by noon, but it was enough to remind us of the season we were entering and the ones we had survived. I repainted the front door myself, the same cherry red Dad used to touch up every few years, now dulled from neglect. It felt right to restore it with my own hands. The porch light stayed on every evening, and this time, not as a symbol of waiting for someone who would never return, but as a promise that no one would be left outside again. Every morning, I'd brew coffee before the sun fully lifted over the pine trees behind the house. Dad would sit on the porch with a wool blanket over his knees, the steam from his cup curling into the air as he quietly read a book or just stared into the yard like he was memorizing the piece. We didn't talk about Isolde. We didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was shared. It was on a Tuesday, while reorganizing the hallway closet, that I found the notebook. It was tucked behind a stack of old tax returns and some yellowing church bulletins wedged between a photo album and a dusty copy of A Tale of Two Cities that still had my high school notes in the margins. I recognized the leather cover immediately, scuffed on the corners, the binding slightly torn. Dad had used that notebook for years, grocery lists, phone numbers, sermon quotes, passing thoughts. I sat on the hallway floor, cross-legged, and began to flip through. Pages and pages of familiar scrawl, scribbled reminders, ideas he never got around to, names of people I hadn't heard of in years. It was near the back, though, that I found the entry that stopped me cold. It wasn't dated, but I knew it had been written sometime after I left Ashburn, when the distance between us had widened into something neither of us could navigate alone. If you're reading this, I probably didn't get the timing right, but it was always meant for Seren, the house, the story, the chance to be heard. I read it twice, then a third time. He had never forgotten me, not once, even when his memory faltered, even when my name wasn't spoken aloud in that house anymore. Somewhere deep down, he had still known, still hoped, that I'd come back, and that when I did, I'd need to know the truth had never belonged to Isolde. It belonged to him, to us. I took the notebook into the living room and placed it on the mantel, right beside the restored family photo of me and Dad at the lake, now sitting in the spot where Isolde's award once stood. The next few days settled into a rhythm. Dad still had his moments, forgetting which cabinet held the coffee mugs, asking if it was Saturday when it was Wednesday, but he smiled more. He asked questions again. He started singing to himself while shaving, soft renditions of old gospel hymns he used to hum on road trips. Mildred came by every Sunday with banana bread wrapped in wax paper, tied with twine. She never stayed long, just enough to say hello and ask if we needed anything. I think the visit was more for her than for us. A quiet reconciliation. An acknowledgement that maybe she should have asked more questions or believed fewer answers. One morning, I found a letter tucked beneath the welcome mat. It was from Pastor Monroe. Seren, I owe you an apology, one I should have given long before now. I let appearances convince me that truth was inconvenient. You reminded us that protecting the vulnerable is never optional. Thank you. Caleb Monroe. I folded the note and placed it inside the notebook with Dad's entry. Some truths deserve to be kept together. We didn't host a Christmas party that year. No tree went up, no wreath on the door. But we did hang string lights across the porch railing, and Dad insisted on putting the old rocking chairs back out, weathered and creaky but still sturdy. Every evening, we'd sit for a while, 2 mugs of cider in hand, and watch the snow begin to dust the neighborhood like powdered sugar. On New Year's Eve, I found myself writing in the same journal I used in Raleigh. The one I packed when I left that life behind. I hadn't written anything in months, not since before I returned to Ashburn, but that night, the words came like water through a cracked dam. I didn't come back to win. I came back to remind him and myself that I was still his daughter. And I still am. It wasn't a happy ending. Happy endings are for fairy tales and greeting cards. This was something better. This was true. And this time, when he sat on the porch, the door stayed open, and the light stayed on. Some families break your heart quietly, through silence, through control, through the stories they erase behind closed doors. But sometimes, healing starts when one person decides to stop being quiet. What would you do if the people you trusted most rewrote your life without asking? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. More real-life inspired stories about truth, justice, and quiet revenge are coming your way. Let's talk in the comments. Your story might help someone else find their voice.